He told everyone I was crazy. Not just emotional, not just unstable. He said I was mentally unwell, delusional, and dangerous. First I laughed it off. Then I noticed the way our friends stopped calling. The subtle, suspicious glances. The sudden distance from people who once called me family. It was as if the world had quietly turned against me, and I had no idea why. I was left confused, humiliated, and alone, questioning everything I thought I knew. I remember the exact moment I realized what he had done. It was not a dramatic reveal. It was quiet, like a light flickering on in a dark room. He had been planting seeds for years, weaving lies so carefully that by the time I saw the full picture, the damage was already done. But I refused to let him write my story. I gathered proof, messages, recordings, journal entries, everything he never thought I would keep. I put the truth together piece by piece, and when I was ready, I showed everyone exactly who he was. I watched his lies collapse in front of the very people who once believed him. And in that moment I knew. I was never the crazy one. When I first met Daniel, it felt like stepping into a dream I never thought I would have. He walked into the bookstore where I worked, looking for a gift for his sister, or so he said. Later I would wonder if that story was true at all, but in that moment he seemed genuine. He asked for help choosing a book, made a few charming jokes, and by the time he left, he had my number written neatly on the back of his receipt. Our first date was simple, a coffee shop tucked into a quiet corner of the city. We talked for hours about everything and nothing. He made me feel seen in a way that was rare and deeply comforting. There was something about the way he listened, the way he remembered the smallest details, that made me feel like I mattered. I had dated before, of course, but nothing felt like this. With Daniel, everything seemed so easy, so natural. We quickly fell into a rhythm. He brought me flowers without a reason. He texted me good morning and good night every single day. He met my friends and charmed them all effortlessly. My parents adored him. He seemed to know how to say the right thing at the right time, and I started to believe I had finally found someone who truly understood me. Within a few months, we moved in together. He had a beautiful apartment, neat, quiet, full of warm light, and he insisted I bring my things over. I hesitated at first. I had always been careful about rushing into things, but he made everything sound so reassuring. He said he wanted to build a life with me, and I believed him. Living together was, at first, just as lovely as everything else. We cooked dinner together, watched old movies on the couch, and took long walks on weekends. He was attentive and thoughtful. If I had a stressful day at work, he had already drawn a bath by the time I got home. If I mentioned something I liked in passing, it would show up the next day as a surprise. It felt like a fairy tale, like I had finally stepped into the kind of life people write stories about. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. Started with small comments. A raised eyebrow when I wore something he did not like. A quiet sigh when I wanted to go out with my friends. Questions that felt more like tests. Why I still talked to a male coworker. Why I needed time alone when he had planned an evening together. He never yelled. He never hit. That made it harder to see what was really happening. When I brought up how I felt, he would look wounded, confused, even hurt. He would say I misunderstood him, that he only wanted what was best for me, that he was trying to protect me. And every time I would doubt myself. Soon I found myself changing in small ways. I stopped wearing certain things not because he asked me to, but because I did not want to deal with the disapproval. I started declining invites from friends, telling myself I was just tired, even though I knew it was more than that. I checked my phone less around him, always wary of what message might come through and how he might react. He praised me when I did what he wanted. He told me I was brilliant, kind, beautiful, his perfect girl. But only when I aligned with what he expected. When I deviated, he withdrew, not with anger, but with cold distance. That hurt more than any fight could. I began to crave his approval, to work for it, even when I did not realize I was doing it. The dependency crept in without warning. I started to feel like I needed him to navigate the world. He handled our finances, made our plans, organized everything. I let him because it seemed easier and because I trusted him. He made me feel safe, even when my instincts whispered that something was off. Every time I had a doubt, he was there with an answer. Every time I felt uneasy, he reassured me. I began to believe that maybe I was too sensitive, too anxious, too unsure. I leaned on him for clarity, for direction, for truth. And slowly, I began to lose sight of where he ended and where I began. I did not see it then, not clearly. To the world, we were the perfect couple. And for a long time I believed that too. But beneath the surface, something darker was taking root. Something I would only come to understand after everything else had already fallen apart. It began slowly, in ways that were easy to excuse. Daniel would sometimes disappear for a few hours, not answering his phone or returning texts. When I asked him about it, he would shrug and say he had been busy, or that his phone had died. First, I believed him. Seemed harmless enough. Everyone needs space sometimes, and I told myself I was being too sensitive. But it started happening more frequently. He would leave without saying where he was going, then return with vague explanations that never quite added up. If I pressed for more detail, he would get defensive. He would say I was accusing him of something, that I was being paranoid. And then he would go quiet, sulking for hours, making me feel guilty for even asking. His mood would change without warning. Some days he was warm and affectionate. Other days he was cold and distant, speaking to me like I was a burden. I could never predict which version of him I would get. I tried to adjust to avoid setting him off, but it felt like walking through a maze that kept shifting every time I found my way. He began denying things he had clearly said or done. If we made plans and he changed them last minute, he would insist that I had remembered it wrong. If he promised something and then forgot, he would claim he never said it. At first, I thought I must have misunderstood. But as it kept happening, I started to question my own memory. I would lie awake at night, replaying conversations in my mind, trying to figure out if I was losing touch with reality. He started making offhand remarks to others that painted me in a strange light. If I got emotional about something, he would laugh it off and say, "She gets like this sometimes," as if it was a quirk I could not control. When I was quiet in a group, he would joke, "She is in one of her moods," like I was fragile, unpredictable. These comments were always said with a smile, like he was being playful. But I could feel the shift in how people looked at me. It was subtle, but it was real. Over time, I noticed my circle getting smaller. Friends stopped calling as often. Invitations became fewer. When I asked Daniel if something had happened, he said maybe people were just busy, or maybe I had been acting differently and not noticed. He said I had seemed more anxious lately, more on edge. He said he had mentioned it to a few people, hoping they could help me feel better. He made it sound like concern, like love. But what he had really done was plant doubt in their minds. He had made them question my stability, and I had not even seen it happening. My family grew distant too. My sister, who used to call every week, now barely messaged me. When I mentioned it to Daniel, he said maybe she was tired of my drama, and that not everyone had the patience to deal with someone who was so emotional all the time. I felt crushed by those words, but I did not defend myself. I just nodded, wondering if he was right. I began to feel like I was unraveling. I no longer trusted my own perceptions. I questioned my reactions, my thoughts, my feelings. Every disagreement ended with me apologizing, even when I did not know what I had done wrong. He always found a way to make it seem like the problem was me. And the more I tried to fix things, the worse it seemed to get. I wanted to believe this was just a phase, that stress or work or something else was causing the distance. But deep down, I knew something was breaking. I could not name it yet, and I still wanted to believe in us. But the cracks were growing, and no matter how hard I tried to hold everything together, I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. I began to notice how alone I was when my birthday came and went with barely a message. A few texts from acquaintances, a polite comment on social media, but nothing from my closest friends. No one called. No one visited. I sat in our apartment that evening, a small cake I had bought for myself sitting untouched on the table, while Daniel scrolled through his phone on the couch. When I asked if anyone had reached out to him about plans or surprises, he shook his head and said, "Maybe they are tired of the drama." He did not look up as he said it, and something in his voice told me he had said that before, to them behind my back. It was not just silence that filled the spaces where connection used to be. It was avoidance. My best friend, Claire, stopped returning my calls. My cousin, who used to drop by unannounced just to chat, now only responded with short, distant messages. When I asked Daniel if I had done something wrong, he shrugged and said, "You can be hard to deal with sometimes. Maybe people just need space." He made it sound reasonable, like this was a normal consequence of my behavior. I started to believe it. Daniel began controlling more parts of my life. He questioned where I went, who I spoke to, and what I spent money on. If I stayed out too long, even just to buy groceries, he would ask why it took so long, who I had seen, what I had talked about. It always sounded like concern, never accusations, but the undertone was clear. He did not trust me, and I began to wonder if I could trust myself. Whenever we argued, he blamed me. If he raised his voice, it was because I had provoked him. If he withdrew, it was because I had made him feel unappreciated. If I cried, he said I was being manipulative. He turned everything upside down, made me feel like I was always at fault. And when I tried to explain how I felt, he would say, "You really should talk to someone. I think you need help." It was a phrase he used more and more often. "You are not thinking clearly. You are overreacting again. You always twist things in your head." First, I argued. I insisted that I was trying to express my feelings, not attack him. But he would look at me with this mixture of pity and frustration, and eventually I stopped trying. Then I began to hear that he had said similar things to others. A mutual friend mentioned, almost offhandedly, that Daniel had told her I was going through something emotional and he was trying his best to be supportive. My hands went cold when I heard that. It was so carefully crafted. Just enough truth to sound sincere, just enough manipulation to poison their perception of me. That was when I started writing things down. I kept a small notebook hidden in the back of a drawer. In it, I recorded conversations, dates, exact words. I was afraid I would forget or that I would distort things in my mind. I no longer trusted my memory. I needed something solid, something to hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping away. There were nights I sat in the bathroom with the door locked, notebook on my lap, tears running down my face as I wrote. I did not even know what I was writing for, only that I had to. It felt like the only thread tying me to what was real. I stopped reaching out to people. Every unanswered message felt like confirmation that they believed him, that I had become too much, too unpredictable, too fragile. I felt like a shadow of the person I had once been, unsure, disconnected, afraid. I hit rock bottom one morning when I looked at myself in the mirror and did not recognize the woman staring back at me. My eyes looked tired, my face hollow. I whispered to my reflection, "Maybe I really am the problem." I had never felt so small, so unsure, so lost. I had given everything to a man who now stood at the center of my world, quietly convincing everyone that I was falling apart. And the worst part was, I had started to believe him. It happened on a quiet evening, one of those still nights where everything felt numb and too silent. Daniel had fallen asleep early. His phone left charging on the nightstand. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts moving in restless loops. Something had been building inside me for weeks, an unease I could no longer silence. I reached for his phone, my fingers trembling slightly. I told myself it was only to check something small, something harmless. But once I unlocked it, I knew I would not stop there. His messages were ordinary at first. Work chats, family group texts, reminders. But then I saw that certain conversations had been deleted. Gaps in the timeline. Empty spaces where I knew something should be. That was the first crack. I did not know what exactly I was looking for, but I knew the truth had to be somewhere buried in those silences. The next morning while he was in the shower, I went through our shared laptop. I had never felt the need to look before. But now I searched through folders, browser histories, emails. I found an alternate email address tied to his name, one I had never seen before. When I tried to access it, I could not get in. The recovery phone number was not mine. That was the second crack. The lies had been small at first. He once said he had gone to see his mother when he disappeared for half a day, but she casually mentioned during a family dinner that she had not seen him all week. Another time, he claimed he had been stuck in meetings when I had seen him tagged in a photo at a bar with friends. When I confronted him, he accused me of spying, of being possessive, of overreacting. I had apologized then. Now I wrote the dates down in my notebook and added the details. I began keeping records, timelines, notes, screenshots. I created a file hidden deep on a flash drive I carried in my purse. I saved everything I could find, piecing together inconsistencies. Receipts from places he claimed not to have gone. Appointments he never told me about. Expenses that did not match our shared budget. I checked the credit card statements, and that was when I found the hotel charges. Not one but several. All under his name. All while he was supposedly somewhere else. Every lie had its place. Every omission had its shadow. I began to chart his words against facts. I would ask casual questions, acting indifferent, and compare his answers to what I had uncovered. Each time he lied, it became easier to see the pattern. He lied not only to cover his tracks but to control my reality. He had been constructing a version of me that would discredit anything I might say, while he lived a truth entirely separate and protected. I started therapy, quietly and without his knowledge. I told the therapist bits and pieces at first. I did not even tell her his name during the first few sessions. I only said that I felt I was losing myself, that I could no longer tell what was true or false in my life. She listened without judgment, gently helping me pull the knots apart. Eventually I told her everything. The gaslighting, the isolation, the lies. I showed her my notebook. She did not tell me I was imagining things. She told me I was surviving. With her guidance, I learned how to ground myself. I learned how to separate my intuition from the fear he had instilled in me. I began to trust my thoughts again. I stopped asking Daniel for validation and started validating myself. Slowly, I became someone who observed more and reacted less. I smiled when he lied, played along. I let him believe he still held the reins. I retraced every major event from the past 2 years. I wrote out the timeline, when the mood swings began, when the isolation grew, when the lies first surfaced. I matched his travel dates to the hotel receipts, compared them with deleted calendar entries I recovered from a syncing backup. He had not only lied about where he was going, he had built an entire second life in the spaces I had never thought to question. One night, I found an old message thread on his tablet. One he had long forgotten was linked to an old cloud account. The conversation was with a woman named Alana. They had been speaking for months. It was not just flirtation, it was intimacy. She called him love. He told her about his day, about the books he was reading, even about me. He told her I was unstable, that he was trying to help me through a difficult time, but that he could not let me go just yet. My chest burned as I read those words. Every lie he told me, he had mirrored to her in reverse. I did not cry. Not this time. I printed the messages, saved them to my file. I was not collecting heartbreak. I was building evidence. Every lie was a brick, every manipulation a beam. I was constructing the truth, carefully and patiently. I started to look for patterns in how he managed the people around him. I realized he kept different versions of himself for different groups. Thoughtful and calm with family, charismatic and funny with friends, nurturing and patient with me, until I questioned him. Then he became cold, logical, detached. The more I looked, the more I saw how carefully he had built his image, how much effort he had put into appearing like the perfect partner. He did not expect me to be this quiet. He thought he had broken me, but I was learning. I was preparing. He had underestimated my silence, never realizing it was not submission. It was strategy. I began collecting witness stories too. I reconnected with old friends, asking simple, harmless questions. Did Daniel ever mention why he missed your wedding? What did he say when I could not make it to the party? The answers never aligned with what he had told me. Each conversation was another thread in the web of deception he had spun, slowly unraveling now in my hands. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, he rested his head on my shoulder and whispered, "I do not know what I would do without you." I smiled, gently stroking his hair. I said nothing, but in my mind, I repeated the truth I had finally accepted. He needed me silent and broken, but I was no longer either of those things. I knew it was not yet time to reveal what I knew. Not yet. There was still more to find, more pieces to put into place. But I was no longer in the dark. The truth was mine now, and it was growing stronger by the day. He had told everyone I was crazy, but soon they would all see what I had seen. And when that moment came, there would be no denying it. The truth would not whisper. It would roar. I never imagined how far he would go to shape a reality that served only him. What I uncovered next left me breathless, not in shock, but in a cold, calculated understanding of how deeply he had manipulated everyone. It was not just the lies he told in person. It was the trail he had carefully built online, through emails, social media messages, and even staged incidents designed to discredit me before I ever had the chance to speak. It began when I accessed our shared cloud backup. Buried in folders with generic names, I found screenshots of conversations that had never happened. At first, I thought they were real, until I saw one where I supposedly admitted to harming myself, a message I never sent. It was crafted to look like a confession, something someone might show a friend or a therapist to express concern. The timestamp was from months earlier, during a week when I had been out of town visiting my sister. The message was never sent from my phone. It was never written by me. He had created a false trail of instability, messages that painted me as paranoid, jealous, emotionally volatile. I found edited emails, drafts with my name and tone, where he had rewritten my actual words to make it seem like I had threatened him during an argument. He saved these, not in a hidden folder, but in a place where they could easily be discovered by someone if needed. His narrative was not just spoken, it was documented. There were even social media exchanges I did not remember having, replies from my account that I never wrote. When I checked the login history, I found multiple access points from his devices. He had used my accounts to argue with people, then pointed to those arguments as evidence that I was unwell. It was more than manipulation, it was orchestration. He was directing a play, and I was both the villain and the unaware lead. When I first confronted him, I thought the truth would shake something loose. I chose a quiet moment and calmly laid out what I had found. The emails, the login history, the inconsistencies in his stories. He listened without interrupting. For a brief second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. But it disappeared quickly, replaced with a practiced look of concern. "You really are not well," he said softly. "This obsession is getting dangerous. You are making up stories in your head." He leaned forward, placing his hand on mine as if he were comforting a patient, not a partner. He told me he would call someone, that maybe I needed more help than he could give. That was when I realized. He never expected me to confront him with facts. And now that I had, he would double down. Within a week, I began to hear from people who had not spoken to me in months. One of them told me Daniel had reached out, saying he was worried about my mental state, that he was trying to get me help, that I was seeing things that were not real. He had laid the groundwork perfectly. My attempt to confront him only proved his story, at least in the eyes of those who trusted him more than they trusted me. I stopped trying to convince anyone. Instead, I focused on collecting undeniable proof. I began recording our conversations, quietly, on a device hidden in my purse. I saved voice memos where he contradicted himself. I took screenshots of everything, downloaded logs, printed copies of manipulated messages and set them side by side with the originals when I had them. Every inconsistency became a file. Every lie became another thread in the case I was building. He thought I would break. He believed his lies were strong enough to bury me completely. But what he did not understand was that I was not trying to win an argument. I was preparing for a reckoning. I stopped reacting. I smiled when he lied. I nodded when he played the concerned partner. And all the while I was putting together the final piece of the plan. The moment where I would bring everything to light. Not just to him, but to everyone who had been convinced I was the problem. He had built a web of lies, but I was holding the scissors. And soon I would cut it all down. It did not happen in a dramatic showdown. There were no screaming matches or public arguments. The truth came out quietly, deliberately, exactly the way I intended. I had spent months preparing for this moment, not only to reveal the lies but to reclaim the person I had been before he tried to erase her. Began with a message. It was not emotional or accusatory. It was composed, direct, and supported by evidence. I sent it to those closest to him. His family, his friends, even a few of my own who had drifted away under the weight of his whispers. The message contained everything. Screenshots of manipulated texts and fake conversations. Recordings of him contradicting himself, gaslighting me, laughing about how easily people believed him. Voice memos that captured the cruelty in his voice when he thought no one else would hear it. Side-by-side comparisons of emails. His edited versions against the originals. I did not ask anyone to take sides. I simply presented the truth. I told them I was done living under a false narrative, and I would no longer be silent about the damage he had done. Then I pressed send. The silence afterward was deafening. Hours passed, then a day, then another. And slowly, the responses began to come in. Some were shocked. They apologized for not believing me, for not asking more questions. A few said they had always sensed something was off but did not want to get involved. Others said nothing at all. But their silence no longer mattered. I had not exposed him for them. I had done it for myself. His sister called me, crying. She said she had believed him when he said I was unstable, but after reading and hearing everything, she could no longer deny what he had done. A friend I had not heard from in over a year messaged me to say he had watched Daniel slowly rewrite who I was, and now he understood why I had disappeared. Daniel tried to respond. He sent out his own message, filled with excuses. He claimed the recordings were taken out of context, the messages were fabricated, that I was using technology to create fakes. But it was too late. The evidence was too detailed, too consistent. People had seen the pattern. They had heard his voice. They had watched him try to rewrite reality again in real time. For the first time, no one rushed to his defense. He stopped replying after that. He disappeared from the group chats, removed me from social media, blocked my number. But I did not care. I was done chasing the version of him I thought I had known. The mask was gone, and I no longer needed an apology or an explanation. I felt the shift inside me. I stood taller, and breathed deeper. The weight that had lived on my chest for so long began to lift. I stopped second-guessing myself in every conversation. I no longer felt the need to over-explain or apologize for emotions he once used against me. I was not broken. I had never been broken. I had only been silenced. I walked through the world with clearer eyes. People began to see me differently too. Not as someone fragile or unstable, but as someone who had survived something calculated and cruel. And not only survived it but exposed it. He had spent years trying to convince everyone that I was the liar, that I was the problem. But in the end I told the truth. And the truth, once spoken clearly enough, has a power that no lie can compete with. After everything came out, there was no explosion, no dramatic reckoning in the streets or in a courtroom. Life, as it often does, moved on quietly, but not without leaving behind its permanent changes. I was not the same woman I had been before. And truthfully, I never wanted to be her again. I had shed the skin of who I had to be just to survive. And now I was learning to live without fear again. Some people never reached out. Even after seeing the evidence, reading the messages, and hearing the recordings, they stayed silent. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps it was discomfort, or maybe they still held tight to the version of the story that felt more convenient. I learned not to chase their understanding. Not everyone will apologize. Not everyone will admit they were wrong. That is their burden to carry now, not mine. But there were others. People who returned quietly, with kindness and humility. Friends who said they were sorry for walking away. Family who admitted they had been manipulated too, who had truly believed they were trying to help me by siding with him. I did not welcome everyone back immediately. Rebuilding trust was slow, and for the first time in years, I honored the pace I needed to heal. I was no longer desperate to be liked, to be believed. I was more interested in being safe, whole, and honest with myself. I spent a long time in therapy, working through the layers of damage his lies had caused. The manipulation had seeped so deeply into my sense of self that, at times, I did not know which thoughts were mine and which were planted by him. The constant second-guessing, the internal shame, the fear that no one would ever see me clearly again. It took time to silence those echoes. But week by week, I began to feel stronger. The most difficult part was learning to forgive myself. For not seeing it sooner. For staying as long as I did. For believing him when he said I was the problem. But the more I learned about gaslighting, the more I understood that it was never about being naive or weak. It was about being targeted and manipulated by someone who was practiced, deliberate, and incredibly convincing. I stopped blaming myself for falling into his web. Instead, I started celebrating the strength it took to crawl out of it. He did not face legal consequences. Not in the way people sometimes expect. There were no arrests or charges. But his reputation never recovered. Once the truth was out, people kept their distance. The charm that had once made him so believable now seemed hollow. The charisma that once shielded him had cracked. He left his job within a few months. I heard he moved to another city. But I did not follow his story. I had no reason to anymore. He no longer held space in my life. What mattered was that I got my life back. Slowly, I began to do things for myself again. I went back to school, something I had put off because he told me it was unnecessary. I joined a community of women who had experienced similar abuse. And for the first time, I did not feel alone in my story. I found strength in their stories, and I shared my own, not from a place of bitterness, but from power. The experience taught me to listen to my intuition, to protect my peace, and to believe in the voice inside me even when others tried to drown it out. I began to set boundaries, firm ones. I learned to say no without guilt, to walk away from anything that felt controlling or false. I chose solitude over manipulation, clarity over chaos, peace over pleasing. And now, when I walk into a room, I do so with my head high. I no longer carry the weight of proving myself to anyone. I speak clearly. I live fully. I love carefully but deeply. I trust again but with eyes wide open. He told everyone I was crazy. He convinced them I was the problem. But in the end, the truth came out, not because I screamed it, but because I lived it. I stood in it. I let it guide me forward. There is power in survival, but there is even greater power in rebirth. I am no longer the woman who was broken down by lies. I am the woman who rose from them. And that is how my story begins again.